So recently I've been playing a fun deep-sea horror survival game called Barotrauma. The range on this... Now, Barotrauma is extremely chaotic. It also has an amazing horror element, and most importantly, it has some beautiful, beautiful art assets. And I want to take those 2D assets and recreate them in 3D, for a Barotrauma-inspired short film that I am currently working on. I've been working hard over the last week or so to get some previs shots in to try and figure out how everything's gonna look. And as you can see here, I've got something which looks quite rough, but there's a fair bit going on, and it's not bad work for quite a short amount of time. Now, while obviously some of these assets are downloaded, a lot of them are custom, which is something I've not done much in my past films, but I've been wanting to significantly improve my skills with 3D modeling, so I've been trying to do as much of that myself as I can manage to. Within reason, of course. Well, today I'm going to give you 5 crucial tips for recreating 2D game art inside of Blender in 3D. Now, this can actually apply to recreating most things inside of Blender. This video is just especially catered towards recreating 2D art because that's what I was working on for this project, and I found that initially I was very slow and inefficient with it, so I hope I can give you some useful ideas today. Firstly, use image reference inside of Blender. A really good way to do this is by using the Images as Planes add-on, which you can check you have enabled inside of the add-on section in Blender's preferences. I know a lot of you will already have this, but yeah, it basically lets us go and download an image. Now, in terms of the type of image that you want, ideally you want to get orthographic images. And what this means, I can demonstrate roughly. So for example, you can see in this scene we have depth perception. We have perspective here, we can tell how far away things are from our viewport from our camera. However, if I click numpad 1, we go into an orthographic perspective, and essentially everything is just completely flattened out. We don't really have any depth perception or perspective here anymore. Everything kind of looks the same size, it's not skewed at all. We can't really tell how far away it is from us, and that's essentially what orthographic is. And the reason that we want that is so that we can go into 2D side-on views and essentially recreate cross-sections of the model accurately without the depth skewing the proportions at all. And you'll see for the revolver that I'm currently blocking out, I am using a 2D orthographic image as my reference for creating the 2D cross-section. And yeah, you can get by just fine with a single cross-sectional image, it's just that you'll have to fill in details and kind of know your way around the model and what it should be like a little bit more. Having more reference images will always be better. Just get as many of them as you can. I'd highly recommend this free program called PureRef, and it's amazing. You can basically just go ahead and drag images straight into it, and it has great scaling features and all of that. You can like go and drag in a bunch of different reference photos, get kind of like a mood board set up or whatever you would like to do, and you can kind of figure out what you want to import into Blender specifically, and then you can go ahead and import your final image as reference into Blender, and you can figure out your proportions of your model, the scale of each part, and yeah, it's a really useful tip. It's quite simple, but I think it helps a huge amount, and it was the biggest thing I was missing when I first started out. Next is another quite simple tip, which we'll just go over quickly. Don't restrict yourself to only using one object in Blender. A lot of times I see people modeling, and especially I found it an issue in myself, was I would just basically go ahead and try and make a freight train or a battleship out of a single cube, and it was really restrictive for me. Like for instance, like I want to have something going like straight horizontal, I don't want it on any angle, but oops, I've kind of screwed this up here. You're just going to want to add more objects. Boom, that's way easier, and now you've got this part to work with. If you want to animate anything, this is going to make it way easier. Like if you've got a gun or something, you can have different moving parts like interacting with each other, and that makes that a whole lot easier too. And the thing is, this isn't destructive at all. You can go ahead and you can just Control J and join these items together later once you're done. If you don't want to move anything separately, if you're completely locked in and done, and you can save copies where they are separated objects as well, which is what I usually do. There's going to be a lot of people who are watching this who are like, why would you ever want to do it in one object? I've never done that before, but that was just something that I did, a mistake that I made, and I've seen a few other people do it too, and so I would just highly recommend, don't be scared of adding more objects. It doesn't make you any worse as a modeler. It's really just something which will help speed up everything and make it a lot simpler overall. Now, another thing, I would highly recommend referencing the game textures, or just whatever the textures of the art that you're trying to recreate, or whatever thing in real life that you're trying to model. Just anything, reference the textures from that. And there's some really useful things that you can do, especially using a color ramp. There's this useful feature if we go in here, and that we can click this little eyedropper over here, which you may or may not know about already, and you can go and click on any color in Blender's viewport, and it will just grab it. We can go and grab this blue as part of the interface, and if you have your texture loaded in or anything like that, you can go ahead and you can grab the colors as you'll be able to see in here. When I make the textures for this revolver, I've actually grabbed the exact color value of the revolver, and I can just use that from here. And I've kind of modeled around and recreated key details in 3D with depth of the like based on the material of the revolver as well, which is just like useful for kind of grounding it. And yeah, doing all that kind of stuff like that will just make the whole model feel a lot more well integrated. Like the textures are like not an incredibly high effort part in comparison, depending on how long you want to spend on them, and they do a lot in terms of the final render. My textures are quite basic for this, but it looks recognizable as the Barotrauma Captain's Revolver, and so I'm quite happy with that. Another option also is to actually use the image texture itself on your 3D model. Now, you're going to need a half-decent resolution to be able to do this, otherwise it's just going to look really grainy and awful, especially if you try and do any kind of bump mapping based off of that. But you can do that if you just want to kind of like bake in a bunch of like 2D details, but I'd recommend just like kind of modeling out the things that you want to be more defined rather than relying on a texture image, which is likely not going to be way too high resolution, but it's always another option if you want to be creative. Next tip. Use modifiers to speed up your workflow. This was another huge thing for me. It's another quite simple thing, so I will just go over it fairly quickly. But there are some main modifiers which you'll like just kind of always use for most things. For example, the subdivision surface modifier. Essentially, this will help smooth out your mesh a huge amount. And if you don't apply this modifier, it's non-destructive, so you can like reverse changes and like reduce the resolution very, very easily. You can go ahead and take edges and like kind of like proportionally edit stuff. It's really, really useful. Another thing, everything looks better with bevels pretty much, even if they're very subtle. Like for instance, like these ones are like quite strong bevels, but you can go quite subtle with this to it. As you can see, if I hide this, we get quite sharp edges. Another thing to really speed up your workflow is the mirror modifier. You can just use that to work on half of a mesh at a time. We just drag it away from the origin a bit. Now we've got two identical cubes, and no matter what we do to them, they're just gonna kind of mirror the same things as each other, and it's really, really useful. I still don't use this enough, but it's really, really good if you've got a symmetrical model that you want to work on. Another quite useful thing as well is the wireframe modifier. This is the last one that I'll go over just briefly before moving on. But you can use that to create things like these railings over here, which I've got on the submarine model which I created for this project. But essentially you can subdivide a couple of planes so that you get this kind of shape in that wireframe, and then when you add the wireframe modifier, it basically solidifies the wireframe into like a mesh, and suddenly you've got fences, and you can shortcut kind of like things like that quite easily using the wireframe modifier and make some really cool sci-fi looking things as well. My very last tip to you is a basic one that applies to all art, but especially this. Don't aim for perfection with this. You can see this model is far from perfect. However, I spent about 2.5 hours on it in total, and if you think about having to create about like 8-10 models or so for a project like this, just custom, you don't want to be spending way too long on them. And for sure, if I was a lot better at modeling, I could have made something that was like actually quite passable, way better than this, but just not quite at that stage with my modeling journey yet. But if you're batch making models, if it's just for like a kind of project, and like just think about like, are people going to notice that the watering can is like a little low poly and a little bit janky in the background? Well, if they are, that's probably good, because that means that you've not got bigger problems. And in my case, I've definitely got bigger problems. Use your time wisely, prioritize a bit, don't get too hung up on the small details. And yeah, just make the models, have fun. This video has been pretty broad. It might not have been quite as specific or like packed with technical information as you would have hoped it to be. If it is, like, let me know in the comments. If you have anything that you think I should have mentioned which I missed out on, definitely let me know too. I'm always kind of striving to improve my videos for you guys. Big thank you for 1,000 subscribers, by the way. It's huge for me. This film, if I'm being completely honest, has been a little bit demotivating because it feels so janky. My last film felt a lot better when I was making it. I felt very motivated because I was seeing like amazing shots come together and I was excited for what was to come next. This one I feel like I've kind of hit a bit of a roadblock with, but I'm going to do my best to push through. Even if the result's janky, I'm going to try and do my best to push through with it and create something cool for you guys. So yeah, there's that to look forward to, and my next projects after that. Thanks so much for watching. Consider checking out the teaser trailer for this project if you haven't already, or just one of my other videos. And I will hopefully catch you in the next one. Thanks so much again. It's been Yeeson, and goodbye.